The flames didn't stop her. Nothing did. Adriana Bellini's lungs burned as she hauled 240 pounds of unconscious Mafia boss across scorched marble, her arms shaking, her dress melting to her skin from the heat radiating off the collapsing ceiling behind them. Around her, men who called themselves soldiers, men with guns strapped to their chests and loyalty tattooed into their knuckles, were sprinting for the exits, screaming for cars, abandoning the one man they'd sworn to die for. She hadn't sworn anything. She was just the maid. "Don't you dare die on me," she gasped, dragging Salvatore De Luca by the collar of his ruined jacket, glass crunching under her knees as another support beam groaned somewhere above them. Blood matted his dark hair where the first blast had thrown him into a marble column. His face, the face that made grown men flinch when he walked into a room, looked almost peaceful now, slack and pale, utterly unlike the man who terrified an entire city. 30 seconds earlier, the west wing of the De Luca estate had been a ballroom full of silk gowns and champagne. Now it was a furnace. She got him past the threshold, out onto the stone terrace, and collapsed beside him just as the window behind them exploded outward in a shower of fire and glass. She threw her body over his without thinking, without calculating, the way she'd thrown herself over nothing and no one in 29 years of being invisible. If you've ever loved someone the world told you not to look twice at, you already know why she didn't run. Stick around, because this story is about to break your heart before it puts it back together. Hit subscribe now, because where this goes next, you will not want to miss a second of it. His eyes opened. For one long moment, Salvatore De Luca stared up at the woman crouched over him. Soot streaked across her cheeks, her curves shielding him from falling debris. Her hands, soft, warm, trembling, pressed flat against his chest like she could hold his heart together by sheer will. "Who?" he rasped. "Don't talk. Don't move." "You hit your head." Her voice cracked, but her hands didn't. "I've got you. You're the maid," he said, like the words didn't make sense together. The maid, the woman who refilled his coffee at 6 a.m. and never met his eyes. The woman his fiancée called the help, in a tone that made the word sound like an insult. "Adriana," she corrected, breathless. "My name is Adriana." Sirens screamed in the distance. Smoke rolled black across the night sky. And 40 feet away, near the line of black SUVs and panicking guards, a woman, in a blood-red gown, stood very still, watching the scene on the terrace, with an expression that wasn't relief. It was fury. Nobody had seen Adriana move. One moment she'd been clearing dessert plates in the East kitchen. The next, she was the only person running toward the fire instead of away from it. Later, when the paramedics finally reached them, when Salvatore was loaded onto a stretcher still gripping her wrist like he couldn't stand to let go, one of his men, a giant of a man named Enzo who'd been with the family 15 years, leaned down and whispered something to her that made her blood run cold. "You shouldn't have done that," Enzo said quietly. "Now everyone's going to want to know why the only one who ran in was the maid nobody notices." She didn't understand it then. She would understand it soon enough. 3 days earlier, Adriana had been nothing more than furniture in that house. The plus-size girl from the coast who cooked, cleaned, and kept her head down because the alternative was unemployment. And unemployment, for a woman who sent half her paycheck home to a mother with a bad heart, was not a luxury she could afford. She'd learned to be invisible in rooms full of powerful men. She'd learned to smile when the boss's fiancée, a sharp-tongued socialite named Vittoria Conti, made comments about her portions in front of the entire staff. She'd learned that men like Salvatore De Luca, men with tattoos crawling up their necks and empires built on blood, did not see women like her. Not really. She'd been wrong. Because 2 nights before the fire, In the quiet hours when the house slept and she was the only one still awake scrubbing pans in the kitchen, Salvatore had walked in looking for a glass of water and found something he didn't expect. A woman who wasn't afraid of him, wasn't performing for him, wasn't trying to get something from him. "You're still up," he'd said, leaning in the doorway, sleeves rolled to his elbows, ink winding up both forearms like a second skin. "Someone has to make sure the kitchen doesn't burn down," she'd answered without looking up. "God knows the last 3 chefs you hired couldn't manage it." He'd laughed, actually laughed, a low, surprised sound that made Enzo, stationed in the hallway, glance up like he'd misheard. Nobody made Salvatore De Luca laugh. Not in that house, not in 3 years. That was the night everything started tilting sideways, though neither of them knew it yet. That was the night Vittoria Conti, watching from the top of the staircase in her silk robe, decided the maid was a problem that needed solving, one way or another. Now, with the west wing of the estate reduced to ash and Salvatore's blood on her hands, Adriana had no idea that the fire hadn't been an accident at all. She had no idea it was only the beginning. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and money, the kind of sterile luxury that came with private wings and armed guards outside every door. Adriana sat in a stiff chair beside Salvatore's bed, still wearing the ruined dress from the night before, refusing to leave even when Enzo offered, twice, to send her home in a car. "I'm not going anywhere," she told him, and something in her voice made the big man stop arguing. Salvatore woke just after dawn, his head wrapped in gauze, a machine beeping steadily beside him. His eyes found her immediately, like he'd known exactly where to look. "You stayed," he said. "Somebody had to make sure you didn't rip your IV out being stubborn." She tried to keep her tone light, but her hands were shaking again, the same way they'd shaken on the terrace. He studied her for a long moment, really studied her, the way no one in that house ever had. Not her uniform, not her size, not her position. Just her. "Why did you run in, Adriana? Everyone else ran out. Enzo ran out. My own cousin ran out." His jaw tightened. "Why didn't you?" She looked down at her hands. "Because you were the only person in that house who ever asked me how my mother was doing. Everyone else just saw the maid." Her voice dropped. "You saw me." Something shifted behind his eyes, something raw and unguarded that a man like him rarely allowed anyone to witness. "I'm going to need everyone watching this story to sit with that for a second," is the kind of line you'd expect from a narrator. Except this wasn't a story to Salvatore. This was his life cracking open in a hospital bed, and he didn't know what to do with the feeling clawing up his throat. Before he could say anything else, the door burst open. Vittoria Conti swept in like a storm in Prada, designer heels clicking against tile, her eyes sweeping over Adriana with undisguised contempt before landing on Salvatore. "Thank God you're alive," she breathed, rushing to his bedside, completely ignoring the woman who'd pulled him out of the fire. "I was terrified. I've been calling everyone." "You left," Salvatore said flatly. Vittoria blinked. "What? You left me in that fire, Vittoria. You and everyone else. Enzo told me." "You were in the car before the second explosion even hit." His voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath it. The kind of steel that made grown men in his organization go pale. "She's the one who came back for me." Vittoria's gaze cut to Adriana with a hatred so sharp it could have drawn blood. "She's the maid, Salvatore. She probably saw an opportunity and get out. 2 words. Ice cold." Vittoria's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You cannot be serious. After everything, after 3 years, you're choosing her over me because she got lucky and happened to be standing there?" I said, "Get out." She left in a fury of clicking heels and slammed doors, and Adriana sat frozen in her chair, terrified she'd just watched her entire livelihood detonate in front of her. A woman like Vittoria didn't lose gracefully. A woman like Vittoria made people disappear. She was right to be afraid, just not about what she thought. 2 floors below, in the hospital parking structure, Vittoria pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd sworn she'd never use again. A number belonging to a man from a rival family, the Bellucci organization, the same family Salvatore had been quietly at war with for 18 months, over territory neither side would concede.
"It's done," she said into the phone, her voice trembling with something that wasn't grief. "He's alive. The plan failed." A pause. A low voice on the other end, calm in a way that made her skin crawl.
Then we go to the second plan. And this time, Vittoria, make sure the maid isn't standing in the way. She's becoming a complication. Vittoria's eyes narrowed as she stared up at the hospital's glowing windows. She won't be a problem much longer. Back in the room, Enzo pulled Salvatore aside, while a nurse checked Adriana's minor burns. His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for his boss. "Sal, the fire investigators found something. It wasn't electrical. There were accelerant traces near the West Wing generator. Somebody wanted that explosion to happen." Salvatore's face went hard as stone. "Who knew I'd be in that wing? Family only, staff, security, and..." Enzo hesitated. "Say it. And Vittoria's people. She arranged the seating chart that night. She's the one who moved you to that side of the house 20 minutes before it blew." The machines beside Salvatore's bed beeped steadily, indifferent to the storm breaking behind his eyes. 20 feet away, Adriana winced as the nurse cleaned a burn on her forearm, unaware that the woman she'd just made an enemy of had already put a second target on her back, and that the fire hadn't been the end of anything. It had only been the opening move. "If you were in that hospital room right now, who would you be more afraid of? Vittoria or whoever she just called? Drop your guess in the comments, because what happens next is going to prove you both right and wrong at the same time." Salvatore reached for Adriana's hand before she could pull it back from the nurse. "Move into the main house," he said, "not a request, where I can protect you." Adriana's heart slammed against her ribs. "Salvatore, don't." His grip tightened, gentle but unshakable. "Don't tell me you're just the maid again. Not after last night. Not ever again." Outside the window, storm clouds were gathering over the city, and somewhere across town, in a house with too many locked doors, Vittoria Conti was already making the calls that would set the next fire. Adriana moved into the main house on a Tuesday, carrying one suitcase, and a lifetime of instincts telling her this was a mistake. Everything about the De Luca estate, the marble floors, the armed men at every entrance, the way conversation stopped when she walked into a room, reminded her she didn't belong. But every night, Salvatore found a reason to sit with her, in the kitchen, on the terrace where he'd almost died. In the quiet hours when the house finally slept and it was just the two of them, no titles, no staff uniforms, no bosses. "Tell me about your mother," he said one night, 2 weeks after the fire, his tattooed forearms resting on the kitchen island across from her. "Her heart's weak, has been for years. That's why I took this job. The pay lets me send her to a good cardiologist in the city." Adriana stirred her tea, not quite meeting his eyes. "You don't have to pretend to care about that." "I'm not pretending." He said it so plainly, so without performance, that she believed him instantly, which terrified her more than the fire ever had. Because falling for Salvatore De Luca wasn't just dangerous. It was a death sentence waiting to be signed. She found that out 3 days later, when a manila envelope arrived at the estate addressed to her, not to the house, not to the staff, but to Adriana Bellini by name. Inside was a single photograph, her mother, walking out of a pharmacy in their hometown 400 miles away, completely unaware she was being watched. On the back, in neat handwriting, "Leave before someone gets hurt." Adriana's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. She didn't tell Salvatore. Not at first. She told herself she could handle it. That she'd survived worse than veiled threats from strangers. That maybe if she just kept her head down the way she always had, it would pass. But 3 nights later, hiding in her room rereading the note for the 100th time, she heard raised voices coming from Salvatore's study downstairs. She crept to the landing and listened. Bellucci's been making moves for months, Sal. And now with Vittoria feeding them information, they know things they shouldn't know. Your schedule, your security rotations. The fire wasn't random. It was planned down to the minute. Enzo's voice, tight with barely controlled anger. You're telling me my own fiancé tried to have me killed? Salvatore's voice was low, dangerous. A register Adriana had never heard from him. Ex-fiancée, Enzo corrected. And yes, we have a witness. One of the caterers saw her near the generator room 20 minutes before the blast. She's working with the Bellucci's, Sal. Has been for months. Probably long before the engagement ended. A long silence. Then a sound like a fist connecting with a wall. She's not done, Enzo added quietly. My guy on the inside says there's a second plan. Something bigger. And Sal, they mentioned Adriana by name. They know she's important to you now. That makes her a target. Adriana's blood went cold. She backed away from the landing so quickly she nearly fell down the stairs, the envelope crushed in her fist. Her mother's terrified, unknowing face burned into her mind. She didn't sleep that night. By morning, she'd made a decision that felt like ripping her own heart out through her ribs. She was going to leave, quietly, before dawn, before anyone woke up, before the man she was falling in love with became a man she got killed. She got as far as the front gate. Going somewhere? Salvatore stood in the driveway in the gray half-light, arms crossed, looking like he hadn't slept either. Behind him, 2 of his men flanked the gate, and for one horrible second, Adriana thought she was already too late, that this was where it ended. I got a warning, she admitted, her voice breaking. About my mother. They know who she is, where she lives. I can't put her in danger because of me. I have to go home. I have to protect her. And you have to let me, show me. She handed over the photograph with trembling fingers. Salvatore's face went through something complicated. Rage. And underneath the rage, a kind of anguish she wouldn't have believed a man like him was capable of. This is why you were leaving. Not because you don't want to be here. His voice cracked on the last word. Just barely. Just enough. Adriana, look at me. I already sent men to your mother's town last week. She's been under protection since the day I moved you into this house. She doesn't know it, and she never has to know it. But she is safe. She has been safe. Adriana stared at him, the suitcase handle slipping from her fingers. You did that without telling me? I wasn't going to let anything happen to the people you love. Not while I have breath in my body. He crossed the distance between them and cupped her face in both hands, tattooed knuckles, impossibly gentle against her skin. I know what I am, Adriana. I know what kind of man loves you right now. A dangerous one. A man with enemies who will use anyone he cares about as a weapon against him. If you want to run from that, I understand. But don't run because you think I can't protect what's mine. What's mine? The words detonated something in her chest. Terror and longing tangled together so tightly she couldn't separate them. I'm scared, she whispered. Good, so am I. He pressed his forehead to hers. Stay anyway. If this story has you holding your breath right now, you are not alone. Drop a comment telling me if you'd have run through that gate or turned back around. Because what Vittoria does next is going to make that choice a lot harder for both of them. Adriana stayed, but 2 miles away, in a rented townhouse with blackout curtains, Vittoria Conti hung up her phone with a satisfied smile. because the men watching the estate had just confirmed something useful. Salvatore De Luca had a new weakness, and weaknesses, in her experience, were so much easier to burn than fireproof men. The gala was Enzo's idea, a public event, heavily guarded, meant to send a message to the Bellucci family that Salvatore De Luca hadn't been broken by a fire or a betrayal. Adriana didn't want to go. Standing beside Salvatore in a room full of Milan's most dangerous, most beautiful people, felt like walking into a lion's den wearing a steak dress. But when she said as much, tugging nervously at the deep emerald gown he'd insisted on buying her, he only took her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "You saved my life in front of everyone who matters in this world," he said. "Tonight, I want them to see who saved it." She'd never felt beautiful in a room like that before. Not once. Not in 29 years of learning to shrink herself smaller in spaces built for people who weren't built like her. But when she walked into that ballroom on Salvatore De Luca's arm, his tattooed hand resting possessively at the small of her back, nobody in that room dared to look at her with anything but respect. Because the most feared man in the city looked at her like she was the only thing worth looking at. Full stop. It lasted exactly 40 minutes. That's when Vittoria arrived, uninvited, dressed in black, flanked by two men Adriana didn't recognize. Men with cold eyes, and the kind of stillness that made her stomach drop before her brain even caught up. "Salvatore," Vittoria called out sweetly, crossing the ballroom floor like she owned it. "I just wanted to congratulate you on your recovery and your new—" Her eyes raked over Adriana with venom. "Arrangement." The room went quiet. Enzo's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket. "You're not welcome here, Vittoria." Salvatore's voice could have frozen the champagne in every glass in the room. "I'm not here for you." Vittoria's smile widened, and that's when Adriana understood, a half-second too late, that this had never been about Salvatore at all. Not tonight. "I'm here for her." Everything happened at once. One of the men beside Vittoria moved, fast, reaching into his coat, and Enzo shouted something that got swallowed by the sudden scream of 200 party guests, scattering for the exits. Salvatore threw his body in front of Adriana on pure instinct, shielding her the exact way she'd shielded him on that terrace weeks ago. And for one suspended, terrible moment, Adriana thought she was about to watch him die twice in the same month, this time in front of her instead of because of her absence. A shot rang out. Glass shattered somewhere above them. A chandelier crystal, clipped by the bullet meant for Salvatore's chest, sending shards raining down like ice. Enzo tackled the shooter before a second round could fire, and in the chaos, Vittoria vanished through a side exit, her heels clicking a rhythm that sounded, to Adriana's ringing ears, almost like laughter. "Are you hurt?" Salvatore gripped Adriana's shoulders, scanning her face, her arms, frantic in a way she'd never seen from him. "Adriana, look at me. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. I'm fine. Her voice broke. "You threw yourself in front of a bullet for me. You pulled me out of a fire for less reason than that." His hands were shaking now. This powerful, tattooed, untouchable man. Shaking as he held her face like she was the only solid thing left in the world. "Did you think I wouldn't do the same?" Enzo dragged the shooter to his knees a few feet away, a knife already pressed to the man's throat. "Talk," he snarled. "Who sent you? Bellucci? Vittoria? Who?" The man spat blood onto the marble and said nothing until Salvatore crossed the room himself, and something in his eyes made the shooter's composure crack in an instant. "It was both," the man gasped. "Vittoria and the Belluccis. It was never just revenge. She sold you out for territory rights on the East Docks. She's been feeding them everything for 8 months. The fire. Tonight. It's all been leading to one thing." His eyes flicked, involuntarily, toward Adriana. They want the girl gone. Vittoria said, as long as she's alive, you're not thinking straight. Said you'd bleed your whole empire dry, trying to protect her. Salvatore's face went perfectly, terrifyingly still. Where is she now? I don't know. I swear I don't. The safe house, maybe. The one on Via Torino. That's the only. Enzo was already moving before the man finished the sentence, barking orders into a phone, mobilizing half the men in the room. Salvatore turned back to Adriana, cupping her face one more time, and for the first time since the fire, she saw real fear in his eyes, not for himself. I need you somewhere safe, right now. No. She grabbed his wrist before he could pull away, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. I didn't run from the fire and I'm not hiding from this. If Vittoria wants to end this tonight, then I want to be there when it happens. I'm done being someone things happen to, Salvatore. I want to fight for what's mine too. Something in his expression cracked open. Love, terror, and a fierce, helpless pride all at once. If you've ever had someone choose to stand beside you in the worst moment of your life, instead of running, hit that like button right now, because Adriana is about to prove exactly what kind of woman she really is, and Vittoria has no idea what's coming for her. Stay close to me, Salvatore finally said, pulling a spare weapon from Enzo's outstretched hand and pressing it, gently, into Adriana's palm. Not behind me. Beside me. She closed her fingers around the grip, steadier than she'd ever imagined she could be, and together they walked out into the smoke-hazed Milan night, toward Via Torino, toward Vittoria, toward whatever ending had been written for them the moment Adriana ran into a burning house for a man everyone else left behind. The safe house on Via Torino sat dark and silent behind a rusted iron gate, the kind of quiet that felt less like safety and more like a held breath. Enzo's men fanned out around the perimeter, while Salvatore and Adriana approached the side entrance, her borrowed weapon steady in her hand, despite the tremor she felt everywhere else in her body. When we get inside, Salvatore murmured, you stay behind me until I say otherwise. This isn't the terrace, Adriana. This isn't a fire I can drag you both out of. I know. Her voice didn't shake. That surprised her most of all. The door had been left unlocked. Too easy. A detail that made Enzo's jaw tighten as he signaled his men forward. Inside, the safe house was stripped bare, except for a single lamp burning in the back room, and beneath it, Vittoria sat waiting in a chair, like she'd been expecting them all along. Took you longer than I thought, she said, rising slowly, smoothing her black dress. I almost started without you. It's over, Vittoria. Salvatore's voice was granite. The Bellucci's have already pulled back their men from the East Docks. Your own family cut ties with you an hour ago, when they realized you botched the gala. You have nothing left. No allies, no leverage, nothing. I have this. Vittoria's hand moved, and Adriana's stomach dropped as she saw the small detonator clutched in the woman's fingers, thumb hovering over a switch. This house is wired the same way the West Wing was, Salvatore. You want to walk away from me again? Fine, but you're taking her with you into the ground this time. Enzo's men froze in the doorway. Salvatore's hands rose slowly, placating, but his eyes never left Vittoria's face. This isn't about territory anymore. This is about me choosing her over you. That's what this has always been about, hasn't it? Not the docks, not the Bellucci's. Me. Vittoria's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough to show the wound underneath the venom. 3 years, Salvatore. 3 years I built an empire beside you, and you threw it away for a maid who cleans up messes for a living. Do you have any idea how that feels? I know exactly how it feels to be thrown away, Adriana said quietly, stepping forward despite Salvatore's warning hand at her wrist. I've spent my whole life being told I was less than, too big, too plain, too much of an afterthought to matter in rooms like this one. You had everything, Vittoria. Money, beauty, his ring on your finger, and you still couldn't be happy unless you burned it all down rather than let someone else have a piece of it. Her voice steadied, grew fiercer. That's not love. That's not even hate. That's just emptiness. And you're about to die alone because of it. For one unbearable second, nobody breathed. Vittoria's thumb trembled over the detonator switch, her mascara-streaked eyes darting between Salvatore and Adriana, like she was searching for a version of this moment where she still won. Then Enzo moved. He'd been inching along the wall the entire time, and in the half-second Vittoria's attention split toward Adriana's words, he closed the distance and seized her wrist, wrenching the detonator upward as it went off in her grip. But the wiring, rushed and amateur compared to the West Wing's, only sparked and fizzled, smoke curling from a wall panel instead of the building coming down around them. Salvatore had Vittoria pinned to the floor before the smoke cleared, his men swarming in behind him, and just like that, 3 years of fear and fire and betrayal ended not with an explosion, but with handcuffs and sirens, and Vittoria Conti screaming threats that nobody in that room was frightened of anymore. Outside, in the cool night air, Adriana's legs finally gave out, and Salvatore caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her into his chest so tightly she could feel his heart hammering as hard as her own. You could have died in there, he breathed into her hair. You walked toward a detonator like it was nothing. I learned from the best. She managed a shaky laugh against his chest. Someone once told me that's just what you do for people you love. He pulled back just far enough to look at her, tattooed hands framing her face the way they had on the terrace, in the hospital, at the gate, every single time the world had tried to tear them apart and failed. I love you, Adriana Bellini, not because you pulled me out of a fire, because every single day since, you've chosen to stay in one, right beside me, when you had every reason to run. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered. He kissed her then, right there on the street, with sirens still flashing red and blue against the buildings, with Enzo pretending very hard not to grin as he loaded Vittoria into a car, with a whole life of dismissal and invisibility finally, completely behind her. This wasn't a woman rescuing a man from flames anymore. This was two people who had chosen each other, fully, in fire and in fear and in every quiet, ordinary moment in between. The kind of love that didn't need anyone's permission or approval to be real. 6 months later, the west wing of the De Luca estate had been rebuilt, and this time the wedding took place there, under a canopy of white flowers, with Adriana's mother crying happy tears in the front row, and Enzo standing as best man with a smile he couldn't wipe off his face. Adriana wore ivory instead of a maid's uniform, and when Salvatore lifted her veil and looked at her like she was the only miracle he'd ever needed, nobody in that room doubted for a single second that the woman who ran into the fire had earned every bit of the life waiting for her on the other side of it. If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone who needs a reminder that real love shows up even when everyone else runs, and subscribe for more stories just like this one, because this is only the beginning of what's coming next.